European freelancers and where to find them. Let me start with why. Why I believe that this is a topic relevant to this conference. I think there are basically two reasons. First of all, many of you are probably freelancers looking for ways to improve your understanding of what does it mean, how to improve your business strategies. And some of you probably work with freelancers in your teams, in your companies, in your startups, are hiring freelancers. So that's one reason. And the second reason is that I believe that there is a long-term underlying problem with the European freelance economy. And that is that the European freelance economy is highly fragmented, much more than in the US, divided on a national level, and that there are far fewer independent professionals than people think, usually. So my goal, my objective for this talk is actually to try to correct some common misconceptions about freelancing, and based on the improved understanding that we may reach, I will try to give you some entirely practical guidelines or insights that you may use in return in your freelance practice or with working with freelancers. Let me just introduce what I do very briefly. I've been a freelancer since 1998. I became a web developer in Spain. So actually, I feel very proud and honored to be a part of the web industry in those pioneering times before the dot-com bubble. And I'm excited to be here. It's an honor, really. And, well, gradually my focus shifted towards supporting other freelancers. So I became a business consultant. Then in 2005, I founded the Czech freelance community. Currently, one of the largest and most active in Europe. We support over 200,000 Czech freelancers in their business. And in 2012, we founded the first freelance think tank in Europe, meeting in Prague and other cities, as well as online these days. And in 2017, I wrote a book about freelancing. It was later translated to English. It's called The Freelance Way. And that was really a pivotal moment for me, because making the transition, making the translation, actually made me way more concerned about the issues of the European freelance economy, something I was not really too focused on before. And it led me to found my latest venture in 2020, the Freelancing.eu, a pan-European freelance community that we are now trying to develop to support freelancers all across the continent. So let me begin with these misconceptions. As you can see, I've been dealing with freelancers and freelance work all my professional career. I'm a freelancer. I work with freelancers as a business consultant. I'm a community organizer, a writer, a researcher. So this talk would be both based on, well, hard facts, hard data about freelance economy, as well as hard realities of doing freelance work. So I hope you will enjoy it and you will have some takeaways from it. So let me begin with the first misconception, a really easy one, that the self-employed is basically the same as a freelancer. Now, this is very often mentioned in the generic media, and it doesn't work on at least two levels. First of all, these two terms are completely different in their nature. A self-employed is a legal status in most countries, while freelancing is basically a certain approach to doing business. It's not universally defined, it's totally informal, but it already tells us something about the nature of the business itself, because we may understand it that it's probably an individual, like working freely on a market and, you know, with some publicly declared expertise or profession. And the second level where it doesn't work is that these are basically two independent groups of each other, and they overlap quite a lot, but they are different. So you have, for example, self-employed who cannot be tagged as freelancers or would not identify as one. So these would be, for example, self-employed who employ other people. I have a client, for example, and she employs at least 10 other people as employees. So she also presents her business as a small business under a brand, despite being self-employed. So when you meet her and her business on a free market, you would take it as a company, probably. And there are also self-employed who are so-called misclassified employees. This is a highly debated hot topic among policymakers these days, because these are people who have the official formal status of the self-employed, but who are actually working for a single client or a single company, and that company treats these self-employed basically as employees. So there is this ongoing policy debate whether, for example, Uber drivers should be protected as employees or not, or whether they should be classified as such. I won't go into that topic today, but it's quite important, and it's moving, it's growing. On the other hand, most freelancers have the self-employed status, but some don't. So, for example, you have freelancers who run their business as a limited company, or who are invoicing through someone else. So, for example, they may be invoicing through an invoicing company or the parent sometimes, or partner. Now, this is definitely not recommended, but it happens sometimes. And there are also freelancers who don't have the status of the self-employed because they may not be required to have one under their local conditions, local laws. So, for example, they only file some one-off income without the status. So as you see, there is an issue with defining freelancers, and although it may look like a totally theoretical one, it actually influences very strongly the way we talk about the freelance economy. As I will explain in my second misconception, but before I just want to show you this quick reality check. I have one in each misconception. There is a great report by IPSI in the United Kingdom that states that there were 14% of the self-employed in the UK workforce, and freelancers, they openly admit that there is no official standard or universally accepted definition of freelancers in the UK. So they define them as basically as qualified workers without employees, working in a range of managerial, professional, and technical occupations. And they found out, doing this estimate, that basically half of the self-employed are freelancers. So just to show you how it relates to a real-world data, the first misconception. The second is related strongly to this problem with the definition, because some of you may be reading articles about the so-called future work. It is a hotly debated topic because, as we all see, the world of work is changing. And I often read this claim that freelancers make up 1/3 or over 1/3 of the labor market. It's really very often mentioned. And I would like to dispute this and show you how it happens that this statement is often quoted. And for this reason, I would like to show you three estimates based on different definitions of the freelance work. And the first and the most quoted one is by Upwork. They are doing annual reports, and they basically claim that 36% of 59 million of Americans are doing freelance work, which is a huge number. So when you actually go into the report and look how they define a freelancer, I will quote them to be precise. They define freelancers as individuals who have engaged in supplemental, temporary, project or contract-based work within the past 12 months. So at the first glance, it looks okay, until you realize that having only a tiniest income, apart from, I would say, regular employment, would make you a freelancer, in their view. So, for example, if you start a website and run some Google ads there, and you receive your first $100 check from Google, that would make you a freelancer, according to their definition. If you do as a hobby produce some necklace and sell it on Etsy, that will also make you a freelancer. Or if you do some babysitting for friends or family, once in a blue moon for some pocket money, that would also make you a freelancer. So as you can see, there is a huge problem with this definition because it counts as freelancers millions and millions of people who are basically full-time employees and who wouldn't identify themselves as freelancers, as independent professionals. Another great example, a golden mean of freelance stats would be done by McKinsey Global Institute. And they did some really exceptional work with the taxonomy of freelance work. They more or less see freelancers as the self-employed workers, which is not really precise in my opinion, but they did a really good job, and they estimated that the full-time freelancers make up 12% of the US workforce. So as you can see, this is already a huge difference. Well, I often see the first number quoted, not the second one. But we may go deeper, way more deeper the rabbit hole, and look into reports that actually don't classify freelancers as a general self-employed population, but who actually look at what these people do. And this is exactly what Fiverr did in their reports. They are really outstanding. I recommend you to look into it. And what they did is that they looked into over 20 million tax returns in the US for people who are non-employers, who don't have employees, and who work in a range of creative, technical, and professional services. So these are people who are likely to call themselves freelancers, and they counted only those who had at least $1,000 in the annual receipts. So they just skipped the tiny incomes, and they found out that these people make only 1.1% of the US GDP and a mere 3.8% of the total US workforce. So as you can see, this is a huge issue because when we read about the future work and how many freelancers there are, and when we actually go deeper into the definitions and look at the number of qualified independent professionals, it's not 36%, it's nearly 4%, something around the number. Okay, so let me move on to my two final misconceptions before I move on to some insights and conclusions and guidelines based on them. And it is the misconception that the gig economy is basically the same as freelance economy. Well, I admit that this is a blurry area, but I would just like to give you two brief reasons why it's always better to speak of freelance economy when we speak of freelancers. First of all, freelancers themselves overwhelmingly prefer the term freelance economy over on-demand economy, over sharing economy, or over gig economy, which was actually the least popular one among full-time freelancers according to Upwork. Now, when you think of it, it's totally understandable. If you think that you're an independent professional operating on a free market, really an entrepreneurial person, you wouldn't like to be called a gig worker or doing some gigs because you do projects. You think long-term. You don't do short-term work, and you are not an asset to be, traded on some platform. You think of yourself as an independent person, as an independent professional. So it's understandable. But the second reason why I believe it's useful to make the distinction is that when you actually look into serious reports about the gig economy, you may actually find out that they're talking about slightly different things. Because, for example, MasterCard, in their report from 2019, they reached a conclusion that 88% of the gig economy is basically related to transportation-based services or asset-sharing services. Companies like Uber or Airbnb, indeed, probably many of these people are those misclassified employees, not independent professionals, freewheeling on the free market. So this has very little to do with independent professionals. And the other reason would be, when you actually go into the report and read the definition yourself, they define the gig economy as, and I quote, digital platforms that allow independent freelancers to connect with individuals or businesses for short-term services or asset sharing. Well, I have so many problems with this definition. First of all, short-term, not all freelancers do short-term work. Asset sharing, once again, this is more like Airbnb or Uber probably. But the most problematic word, in my opinion, is the word digital. Why? Because it leads me to my final misconception that freelancing is all about online platforms. Now, I totally understand why people think of it this way, because there are many online platforms for freelancers. These companies have budgets. They produce quality content, they produce quality reports in some cases, and so they tend to represent their part of the market as the most prominent, most important. But there is very little data to support this concept. Misha Kaufman, CEO of Fiverr, has been saying since 2016 at least, and the company often reiterates on that claim, that only 3% of the freelance work is basically done online. Another source, Gig Economy Data Hub, a great resource like aggregating various stats and reports related to freelance work, claims that less than 1% of the US workforce is actually engaged in online platforms like Uber, Airbnb, Lyft, TaskRabbit, and others. So I don't say that online isn't important. It is. It's a huge trend. It's growing. It will be probably growing for decades. But it's still, you know, in essence, freelancing is an old-school business, and it is also confirmed by the studies done among freelancers. So when we ask freelancers directly what are the top sources of their work, they give answers like friends and family, social media, previous freelance clients, professional contracts, according to Freelancing in America survey. In our survey, 2015, these were personal recommendations, contacts, a website, and a good name. So as you see, the majority of the freelance work comes through weak and strong personal relationships. This is an old-school business rooted deeply in our relation to society, to the professional community. So, I went through all the four misconceptions that freelancer is the same as self-employed. It isn't. That freelancers make up more than 1/3 of the workforce. They don't, unless you use some really super wide definition of a freelance work. In reality, it's way lower. That a freelance economy is basically the same as gig economy. It's debatable, but I wouldn't agree with that. And the final one, that freelance work and freelancing is all about these online platforms that we often read about. It is not. It is, the most of it happens really among us as freelancers. So let me move on to 3 insights related to European freelance economy. I was using the data from the US because we have so many data on the US economy and rather little on the European one. So I would like just to check whether these 2 markets are representative of each other to some extent. First of all, I would just like to give you a short guideline how to think of these independent professionals, independent freelancers who are not gig workers, who don't do dependent work. There are many terms describing this type of works, like full-time freelancers, traditional freelancers, full-time independents. Well, I like the term independent professionals. It relates to most people I know as freelancers, and I like both of these words because independent makes you a really free person, you know, like entering the free market, defining yourself and your expertise, and looking for opportunities. Growing your career, you know, like you are really independent of others, and you can set on this journey and reach very far. And professional is also an important word, because this means that these people are totally serious about what they do. There are no temps, no unqualified workforce. These are people who identify themselves as professionals in a certain field of expertise. So they are serious about growing their skills, growing their expertise. And one more important thing about this. Professionalism, defined as such, is a very old and ancient concept. Each one of you would be able to say how a real professional should behave. You have a probably preset expectations about professional work. We think that freelancers or professionals should be honest, should be real experts, should treat well their clients, should work diligently, etc. This concept goes very long back in time. There were independent professionals in ancient Rome around the period of Roman peace. And these people had basically the same requirements for success as independents. Because, for example, they had to be experts. They had to produce quality work. They had to find new clients and manage well the relationships with their clients. They have to be able to find helpers and find good helpers in order to support their long-time careers. They had to manage well their finances in order to set prices well, make profit, and create reserves. So the idea of these independent professionals is really ancient, it's really old, and although we use new technologies, in essence, the freelancing as it is remains a very conservative way of doing business. Now let's move on. To my reality check here, I selected this slide from a report by MBO Partners from State of Independence in America. Very nice report, quality one. I highly recommend it. And I like this slide because it shows that the older generation cohorts, like baby boomers, earn on average way more than younger ones, than Generation X, my generation, and then millennials. So once again, we have this picture of people who are really serious about what they do. They think long term. They are not sprinting for quick profits. They are building their independent, standalone businesses. They are growing their clientele. They are growing their skills. They are getting better at doing business. And over a long time period, they earn way more. So this is what I mean when I talk about independent professionals. MBO uses a different term. They call them full-time independent workers, but it's basically the same. Now let me move on to the deeper insight about the European freelance economy. Now this is a tricky area because we have very little data to actually study it, but luckily there is a great report sponsored by Eurofund, and that report is basically about self-employed population, but it also tells us something interesting about freelancers in Europe. And this is where we are moving to some practical conclusions. First of all, there were 222 million of the people in the UA workforce, and there were 40% or 32 million of the self-employed. Once again, you see it's pretty similar as the UK number. And the report actually used some pretty smart questionnaire to divide these self-employed into 5 independent clusters. The first cluster was stable own account workers. The second were employers, so self-employed who actually employ other people. That's what I was talking about in my first misconception. Third were small traders and farmers. Fourth were vulnerable, and fifth concealed, so probably misclassified workers. When you actually go into the report and read these descriptions, you may actually find out that the stable own account workers seem to be a great representation for freelancers, because they define them as, and I quote, Nearly all like being self-employed and do not find it hard to bear the responsibility. The bargaining power of the self-employed in this cluster is strong, as they are very likely to have more than one client and can easily find new ones. Almost 90% are able to take time off at a short notice for private matters. So this looks like a freelancer, the way I described it. However, the problem is that the most represented in these clusters are people like shopkeepers, 3.8%, hairdressers, domestic cleaners and helpers, and other professions who are not 100% likely to identify as freelancers because they may be presenting themselves as small businesses, having a brand and, like not really identify as independent professionals. Luckily, the report also states that 9% of the self-employed in Europe identified as doing freelance work, or full-time or part-time, it doesn't matter. So we can make a conclusion here that the number of freelance self-employed people in Europe can be roughly estimated between 1.2 and 3.8%. Once again, you see a pretty nice correlation to the conservative estimate given by Fiverr in the US. And now this is really important because 4% is not much. It's quite little, actually. But you have to remember that we have to divide this number further. Because 4%, even if it would be this most like the higher frontier of our estimate, is for all industries. There are dozens or hundreds of them, and all professions there are. So even the most populated professions for freelancers would be only a tiny fragment of this small percentage. And we have to divide further than that, because if you are actually looking for freelancers, there are another important factors. So for example, in any profession, the number of people who are experienced, who are really highly skilled, is way lower than the number of people who are just beginners or who are, just starting out. So that's one issue. Another issue is that not all freelancers have free capacity. So only a small proportion of freelancers has actually large capacity for a new work. Most freelancers tend to be booked up. They don't have like free capacity 50% for anyone who comes by, right? Like we try to optimize our time spent money ratio. So we try to be booked. And finally, many of the freelancers we are talking about here are just not online. As I explained in my final misconception, it's quite common with freelancers, as I meet them, and with my freelance friends, that some don't have websites. They may have dozens of clients without actually present themselves online. And it also happens in your industry, in web industry, it's quite common. So we may be part of the social media, but not, like doing some serious presentation of us as professionals. So this is important insight. And let me move on to my third insight here about European freelance platforms, like where to find European freelancers, because this is one of the crucial points of my talk here. As I said, the European freelance economy is totally fragmented, and that is why we are building a resource that you may use freely at freelancing.eu/countries, where we are listing every single resource about from the European freelance economy we find. So these are freelance marketplaces, freelance platforms, freelance communities. In some cases, only Facebook groups for freelancers, or blogs, or podcasts. So everything we find that is relevant to doing freelance business, we just list on this website. There are 362 resources in 35 countries we have been able to find so far. And there are, three useful things you can do with this list. First of all, you may just look at it and see how different those countries are. There are countries like United Kingdom, Germany, or France, where you have so many resources available. There are so many communities. There are even local communities. There the support is really great for freelancers. And there are other countries where we were hardly able to find a single resource that is active. So the differences are really huge. If you are an individual freelancer, this is a very useful list for crossing borders. Most freelancers in Europe, I think web industry is a small exception here, they are, just heavily focused on their national markets. So they do work with their clients, I don't know, Czechs in Czechia, Germans in Germany. So this is quite common. It's not really common for freelancers to cross borders and to try to enter this pan-European level in their profession. And actually, when you do it, you may find out that the number of professionals who are established on the European level in your particular profession, it's not huge. These would be people that you would be, seeing, mentioning over and over again. So we are, as Europe, we are strongly lagging behind the US. In the US, you have very well established pan-continental US freelance economy with celebrities, I would say, professional celebrities. In Europe, this is only getting started, and I really believe that this is a generational opportunity for us as independent professionals, because if you go on this international level and you establish yourself in this decade, this would be perhaps a single opportunity in your lifetime as a freelancer, as a professional. So it's very useful for freelancers to think about these differences, and if you speak the language, just try to cross the borders and go there, and think about, expanding your horizons. It's really common for freelancers to be located somewhere and, have the personal contacts there and all the business related. And for people who hire freelancers, this is also very useful because that's where, in some cases, that's when you find the European freelancers who are not listed on marketplaces. And this leads me to my final conclusions, like based on all I've been discussing in this talk. And I have two sets of insights or suggestions. First of all, for people who hire Top Gun freelancers. If you are a company or an HR expert, like looking for experienced Top Gun professionals, I would like to give you some recommendations. First of all, just forget marketplaces where freelancers bid against each other. If you are a top professional, you don't go to Fiverr to bid against, I don't know, people from different parts of the world, like bidding down to the bottom. You don't need that because you are probably in high demand and you are trying to run your business based on your personal context, based on your own ideas, how your business should behave. So just skip this level and rather search and enter freelance communities. These are places where not in nature marketplaces, but where freelancers network with each other and with potential clients, and try to look for connectors there as well. This would speed up your research. Do the research. You need to do it probably because of the reasons I've been giving, that actually when you narrow down the definition of the independent expert, you may find out that these people are really rare. So you have to, search hard, do the research. And when you prepare your strategy, two things. Have a budget. These people can be really expensive. They are professionals who are top experts in what they do, and they charge thousands of euros per day. And it's not totally rare. It's not totally uncommon. I know a number of these people. And be realistic about your negotiating position because it's rather weak. These people have really full calendars. They are fully booked, and you have to convince them. You have to convince them that you are relevant to their vision of their career, of where they are going as independent experts. So these people, they are strong personalities. Another recommendation, a rather obscure one, I would recommend you to prioritize decision makers to deal with these top freelancers. These top freelancers, they try to avoid middle management because in their experience, this is often a waste of time because these people often lack the decision-making power, and it may show later that that they are not able to make the final decision, the final calls. So it's always better to prioritize decision maker for dealing with freelancers, with these top-level professionals. And trust and respect, just build the relationship, because these people are highly valuable for you and your company and your project, because it's not only in the terms of the work done, but it's also in terms of their influence. They usually have really vast networks of real influence they are building over the years, and if they trust your mission, trust what you do, they'll start spreading the word, they start convincing other freelancers to join, and they try to make other influencers thinking about your work, about your project. So this would be my recommendations for people who hire freelancers. And now my recommendations for freelance friends, for people who are freelancers, who are looking for ways to grow their freelance business. And these are not general guidelines. This is only based on what I've been talking about in this talk. So this is not like a super broad recommendation. First, I cannot stress this highly enough. As freelancers, we have our #1 superpower, and this is where we build a complex professional network, when we connect with each other, and when we assemble unique teams, unique friendships, I would say, and we employ this carefully selected networks for the benefit of our clients, or for the benefit of our community, and for the benefit of, your profession in general. Many freelancers, top-level freelancers, are actually movers of their profession, because they are, like going into new trends. They are, doing research. They are publishing. So they are highly visible in the relation to where the general profession is going. So once again, competition is not our game as freelancers. We are best when we cooperate. So try to build on that. Try to enter freelance communities if you are isolated. I know that many web developers in the past, recently it's way less, tended to be isolated because they worked as a contractors for a single client or two clients perhaps, and they didn't find it that useful to network with colleagues. This is absolutely a must if you think about freelancing as actual business. So try to build your network. Find great colleagues, find mentors, find consultants that you may use to discuss the business cases that you are dealing with. As I said, Europe is the future, so cross borders, join projects, explore, and last but not least, as I explained, you are rare. You are really rare on the market if you have some uncommon expertise, but you probably don't price your work as such. Pricing is the most undervalued freelancing skill there is. Most freelancers I work with as independent consultant underprice the work. And what's even worse, clients who think that there are many freelancers that can be easily hired, which in reality isn't that easy, tend to undervalue the freelance work. So try to work on your pricing and become a better negotiator. This is important. Okay, some final thoughts about the future freelance entrepreneurs. I would just like to conclude here with 3 ideas. First of all, I strongly believe that the proportion of online communities, online collaboration between freelancers will be growing for decades to come. There is, as I said, if it's 3% or 5% or 10%, no one really knows, because it depends on the definition of the freelance work, as you've seen. But definitely there is a huge space to grow, to expand. So this is also a great opportunity for people in the web industry who are thinking about, employing other freelancers and drawing these people who are totally offline into the online communities you will be building. So this is a huge trend, and it will go on. Secondly, European freelance economy is being formed. So you have a generation opportunity to join on this level and become, well, Europe-wide, well-known professionals that are established in your professions and who is able to cross borders, both in terms in your networking and clientele, as well as educator or public speaker, whatever you prefer. And the third, I would say that although we have these new technologies, new possibilities, working online, etc., I would say that the freelance business itself, in its core, will remain conservative as ever. It will be based, probably will always be based on these, personal relationships, on these, trust built between people. And I think it hasn't changed much over the couple of centuries, and I don't think it will change much over the next decades. This is who we are. We see ourselves as independent people, as free people, freewheeling the free market, and we see a value in this independence. So we will not easily trade our independence for any sort of benefits. This is a strong value for us freelancers, and I believe it will remain so. So thank you for your attention.